Hello all, welcome back. Today we'll be dealing with the topics vocabulary that can affect the slant and emotive words and neutral words. And let's get on with our first topic, that is vocabulary that can affect the slant. So, what do you mean by the term slant? Let's have a look. The first point, in language, the meaning of the word slant is to present or view information or messages from a particular angle, especially in a biased or unfair way. So basically, in reporting, the meaning of the word slant is to present messages or information in a biased or a partial way. That is the meaning of the word slant. The next point. Though journalists are advised to be neutral in their reporting, it is often noticed that most newspapers have a political slant. We know that, right? Most newspapers, they do have a political slant. They favor a particular political party. Even though journalists are advised to be neutral, the newspapers do have a political slant. The next point. Slant refers to the mode of presenting information in such a way that it appeals to certain groups in society. So it is basically the mode of presenting information so as to favor certain groups of people by neglecting the other. The next point. Bias has almost the same meaning as slant but has strong negative connotations. So, bias and slant are basically the same, but still, bias it has a strong negative connotation. An important aspect of slant is the use of different types of vocabulary to present certain information. We know that the same messages can be conveyed in different ways, and that is an important aspect of slant. It is uh, in the mode that we execute, or in the mode that we say it, that slant comes to play. So it would be either positive or negative. Next point. Emotive vocabulary is to make such points. We'll come to know what emotive and neutral vocabulary or words is in the next section. See, an example of slant is brutal attacker versus brave fighter. So consider this example, brutal attacker and brave fighter. Which of these words is the neutral word? That is the brave fighter, and brutal attacker is the emotive word as it induces an emotion in us. Likewise, in the words stubborn versus tenacious. Tenacious is the neutral word while stubborn is the emotive word. We'll deal with it in detail now. And the next topic, emotive words and neutral words. Emotive language is the deliberate choice of words to elicit emotion. So, emotive language it is the deliberate or voluntary choice of words to induce emotion. That is usually to influence. And there are different ways by which media tries to influence people. It is by bias by omission, bias by selection of sources, bias by story selection, bias by placement, bias by labeling, and bias by tone. So the first way by which media tries to influence people, that is bias by omission. I'll be giving the notes of this section, these points in the description section. So do check it out. Okay. So the first point, bias by omission. To present the news story by leaving one point of view. It is known as bias by omission. To present news story by leaving one point of view. To find instances of bias by omission, the reader has to be politically aware and check whether both sides have been given an opportunity to air their views. That is bias by omission. Bias by omission, as the word suggests, it is when the news story is made by leaving one point of view. The next one, bias by selection of sources. Sometimes newspapers tend to include more sources that support one view over the other, and that is known as selection of sources. In order to favor one, the newspapers, they tend to include more sources that support one view over the other. That is selection of sources. The third one, bias by story selection. News stories that reflect well on certain political parties are highlighted, whereas the involvement of the other side is downplayed. So here the news stories, they are trying to project one political party while downplaying the other. That is bias by story selection. The next one, bias by placement. Story placement indicates how important the editor considers the story. Bias by placement occurs depending on the space and placement allocated in the paper for an article or a story. So it is by diminishing the news value of something important by not allocating or not giving it a proper space in the newspaper. That is bias by placement. The next one, bias by labeling. Tagging of certain politicians and groups with extreme labels, giving others neutral or positive labels. That is bias by labeling. So, placing some politicians or political party in a negative light while portraying the others in a neutral or positive light. That is bias by labeling. The next one, bias by tone. This occurs when the story has only one interpretation of an event or decision to the exclusion of other points of view or perspectives. So, when a story presents only one side of the event or decision, that is known as bias by tone. It excludes other points of view or perspectives. That is bias by tone. So, these are the different ways by which media tries to influence people. Now, let's look at some of the examples of neutral language as well as emotive language. The first example, the neutral language is that the men were killed, just presenting the idea very plainly, the men were killed. The emotive language of the same sentence is the victims were executed in cold blood. See, it tries to influence people or tries to grab people's attention. That is emotive language. It says the victims were executed in cold blood. The second example, neutral language. Mr. Smith was attacked by Mr. Jones for 2 minutes. It is a neutral language. While the emotive language is, for what seemed a lifetime, Mr. Smith was subjected to a vicious, cowardly assault by the unemployed, ragged monster. See, look at the use of the language here. That is emotive language. The next one. Another person in the bar was injured by the man's glass, just presenting the idea very plainly in a casual way. And the emotive language of the very same sentences, an innocent bystander suffered facial injuries when the thug launched his glass across the bar. So these are the examples of neutral language and emotive language. And that brings us to the end of this session. And as assignment, briefly explain the term slant and write down what are emotive words and neutral words and state some examples. Thank you and have a nice day.